Chapter 49. Treadon Nelson. A knocking sound pulled him up from drowning in her eyes. He gasped and looked down. He was on the last page of Ellie's journal, the handwriting shaky. "Whoever you are, however I hurt you, boy, I am sorry." She'd left him. She'd erased his memory and left him in the forest, her own guardian. As the knock sounded again, Treadon stood, drained, confused, but at the same time, completely sure. Treadon cracked the door. Rachel stood with her fist up, prepared to knock again. "Did I interrupt your workout?" "No," Treadon said, grabbing the bottom of his shirt and wiping it across his forehead. The dream had left him sweaty, his face dripping with perspiration. "I thought you'd want a chance to say goodbye before she leaves. Give her a chance to say thank you." Treadon was in a daze, not sure how to feel or what to do. He opened the door wider and started to step out. Rachel put up a finger. "Throw on a new shirt. It never hurts to make a good impression. Now you sound like Jaren." Rachel's face fell. "I'm sorry. I'm sure he's okay. I'm sure he knows what he's doing." Rachel nodded. "He'll find his way." Treadon changed his shirt, stopping to look at his chest in the mirror. There were no scars, no signs of the wound he remembered having. He pulled on the shirt and stepped out into the living room. Ellie stood like a soldier in front of the couch. "I know your story." Treadon's voice didn't hold any emotion. He had to keep it flat, because he wasn't sure where to put the inflection. "I finished reading the journal." The book was in his hands. He must have grabbed it as he walked out of the room. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I never should have used my powers without training. I wish I had never run away from my fate." "Why don't you want to look for him?" "Because it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to him. It wouldn't be fair to me. The connection was never completed. If I found him now, he would be pulled toward me, but we would never know if it was real, if it was his choice." Treadon swallowed. "So you don't want to know? You don't want to give him a chance?" "It's more complicated than that," Gabe said, placing a mug of warm tea on the table. "We don't know the implications of an incomplete bond, and at such a young age, and with Ellie's DNA still containing the dagger that can slay an angel, we couldn't take a chance on an untrained, unvetted guardian. I may not agree with everything the Veil does, but they do prepare guardians for the life they'll have to lead. We have no idea what kind of person Ellie bonded with, or what state they are in today. Even if we gave them a choice, it might be a bad idea." The words twisted Treadon's gut. Ellie did deserve the best. What did he have to offer? He wasn't even sure he should reveal what he knew, but he couldn't let her leave, not knowing. Ellie looked down at her arms, one wrapped with gauze where the white dagger had been ripped from her bones. The left arm had a burn scar from Xander's attempt to get the second dagger. "If we could find out who it was, would you give him a chance?" Treadon kept his hands clasped as he leaned against the kitchen counter. His heel bounced as he waited nervously for the answer. The question was directed at both Ellie and Gabe. Ellie held perfectly still. He could see her running through the possibilities. "It would be too much to ask. If he managed to have a normal life after what I did, I would be asking him to give up everything, risk his life for a life he didn't choose." Abigail and Gabe stood by the door. Treadon saw their glance, heard their communication. They had both given up so much, lost so much, but in that moment they both silently agreed they would do it again. "If we could find him, there would have to be a series of tests," Gabe said. "There would be a chance he would be rejected, even if he did choose to be a guardian. What you've just experienced is only the beginning. Things will only get harder. Caden may lie low for a little bit while he recovers from this setback, but he will come again. He will come for the dagger." Ellie shook her head. "How could I ask anyone to face that without any understanding or experience? I couldn't." "What if I want it?" Treadon said, reaching out and taking Ellie's hand. "What if I chose to face what was coming? What if I chose to stand by you?" Ellie shook her head. "It's not you. I'm already bonded." "What if it is?" Treadon could hardly breathe. "What if it's me? Would you choose me?" Treadon's chest felt like he had a vice tightening down on him. She could reject him, and where would that leave him? Still, he had to try. Abigail took a step forward, putting a hand to her mouth. "Why would you say that? Treadon, why would you volunteer to be her guardian when you know she's already chosen someone else?" Treadon looked at Gabe. I'm ready for the first test. I don't understand, Gabe said. His back was straight, his muscles tense. Treadon put out his hand. Let me see the compass. Gabe said they were connected to the Guardian's DNA. Ellie hesitated and then set her jaw. She didn't believe it. Not yet. She lifted the chain over her head, pulling the amulet away from her chest. The movement looked like it ripped out a part of her soul. There was a mixture of terror and hope in her face. The terror of allowing herself to hope. She set the necklace in Treadon's open palm. For a moment, nothing happened. Treadon's heart dipped. His stomach flipped. Could he be wrong? The amulet had spun before, but never pointed in a direction. If he was right, it was because Xander had been blocking her aura. If he was right, it would point at her. If he was wrong, he really would lose her. A strange tingle worked its way up his arm. The chain shifted as the amulet rose off his palm and started to spin. The amulet made 3 full rotations, the spheres twisting around the circles, rising, falling, lining up. The amulet slowed and stopped, still floating above Treadon's hand. The yellow jewel stopped in the center, the other spheres aligning to point at Ellie's nose. She sagged to the couch. Abigail stepped forward. It's impossible. Abigail turned to Gabe, shaking her head. Tell him it's impossible. The compass is connected to Treadon, like my compass is to me, Gabe said. But I have never heard of this happening. An incomplete bond, a connection formed so young. There is no precedence for it. Gabe. Abigail approached Gabe like he could undo the situation. Tell him it can't be him. I would know. You would know. When would this even have happened? You left me at a park. Treadon wanted to sit down next to Ellie, look into her face, and read exactly what she was feeling, but he was afraid of what he'd see. Disappointment? Rejection? What if she didn't want him to be her guardian? He suddenly understood why Ellie hadn't wanted to go looking. He kept his eyes on Gabe and Abigail, building up his courage before looking at Ellie. Alone? Never. Abigail shook her head. I mean, maybe when you were older, but we were always close by. I was 7 or 8. There were a lot of trees and a road. Why didn't you tell us before? Abigail asked. Because I didn't remember. He yelled the words, anger coming up from nowhere, the last few years coming back, the nightmares, the fear of cars, seeing people differently, being different, always feeling like he was hiding. The frustration rose in him. I didn't remember any of it, just in my nightmares. Abigail's mouth gaped open. The nightmares. I remember when they started. I erased his memory. Ellie spoke softly. The sound sent chills through Treadon. They were as cold and flat as his voice had been when he'd first stepped into the living room. She hadn't decided if this was good or bad. Treadon's throat tightened. He had been hit by a car and was dying. I didn't want to let him die. And then I tried to cover up the mistake with a bad decision. I was young and scared. I'm sorry. Where did this happen? Gabe asked. A small tourist town. Ellie said quietly. She was so good at keeping her voice even. Treadon couldn't get a read without looking at her, and he didn't want to look. Not yet. My mom liked to meet a lot of different kinds of people outside the city atmosphere. She loved it there. Where? Gabe's voice was a stone dropped in a lake. Coos Bay. We lived there for 2 years before they found us. Abigail gasped. Gabe's breathing stopped, a muscle flexing in his neck. You were there? Treadon saw the guilt on his mom's face. You've never been hit by a car. Abigail's head was shaking in denial, like there was an annoying fly buzzing around her head. Are you sure? Gabe asked Abigail. Of course. I would know if my son had almost died. Gabe came across the room and sat on the coffee table across from Ellie. You are the daughter of Vita and Curtis. We thought you died that night. When the Fenris came, Treadon couldn't help it. He looked. Ellie wasn't thinking about him now. Gabe's words had taken her back to the last time she'd seen her parents. I ran back to the house. Ellie dropped her head into her hands so that her voice barely carried. I thought I could tell my mom, get her help, but they were gone. There was nothing left, no bodies, only the floor covered in a swirling black dust. Ellie took a breath and sat up straight, dropping her hands to her lap and looking Gabe in the face like she was ready for the judgment and execution. The pulse I created when I bonded must have destroyed them. Just another thing I didn't mean to do. Gabe leaned back, his hands squeezed into fist. "You've thought this whole time that it was your fault your family was gone?" "I saw the dust. The house was empty." Tears slipped from Ellie's eyes, but she held her head high. "I've been hiding from my mistake for way too long. I'm glad someone finally knows, no matter what my consequences will be." Treadon half expected Ellie to put her wrist out for Gabe to cuff her and drag her off to some kind of Descendant prison. Treadon stiffened, ready to fight Gabe off to give Ellie a chance to run. But she wouldn't. She was turning herself in. "I think there are some things about that night you need to know." Abigail came around the coffee table, her fingers brushing Gabe's shoulder with the slightest touch. Then she sat down next to Ellie and put an arm around her. "I know that a man came to take me away," Ellie said. "He wanted to keep me safe, but I didn't want to go. I was scared." Gabe nodded. "That man was me. I'm the one who told your parents about the vision of Ajura." Ellie shook her head. "I never heard the vision, only that I would have to leave." "That makes sense," Abigail said. "I was there too. This was before the Unguarded started disappearing. I helped Gabe deliver messages, but that was the last night I traveled with him." "Why?" Treadon asked. He remembered traveling with Gabe. He hadn't known what they were doing, but they'd felt like vacations. Abigail shuddered. "Because of what happened that night. And I don't mean the car accident. I didn't even know about that." Gabe nodded and then continued the story. "Your parents went into the bedroom to wake you and your brother, but at that moment we were attacked. A dozen Fenris broke through the windows, slammed through the back door, and ripped through the roof. Abigail had to use a fire poker to defend herself. Vita, Curtis, and I fought with our weapons. Even their son fought. But we could all tell it wasn't going to be enough. Abigail was backed into a corner where the Fenris swiped at her face. It's where she got that scar on her forehead. Vita and Curtis were overwhelmed, and the Fenris pulled them through the window. I was protecting the boy, barely able to keep the Fenris at bay when there was a pulse. The Fenris vanished, disintegrating before our eyes. I thought Vita had done something to get rid of the Fenris, but she never came back. I never knew what happened, but now I know. You've got it all wrong, Ellie. You didn't destroy your family. You saved us." Ellie's hands pressed to either side of her head. "You were there?" Realization stole across her face. "You were the messenger at the door that was going to take me away." "Yes." Gabe swallowed. "But your parents were taken." "And then you just left?" Ellie looked away. "You left me? The bedroom was empty," Abigail said. "We looked for you. We thought the Fenris had taken you with your parents. We had no idea you'd run away, nor that you would come back. We had to get the boy to safety, and I was panicking about Treadon, that we'd left him. But when we got back to the park, he was fine. I never traveled with Gabe again. I wasn't willing to put Treadon in that kind of danger." "That's when my nightmares started," Treadon said. "Yes," Abigail shrugged. The pieces fit together, but the result was the same. Treadon had an incomplete bond with Ellie. Ellie's family was still gone, but now they knew. "What about the other kid?" Rachel asked. Treadon had almost forgotten she was there. She leaned against the counter on the far side of the fridge, arms folded. "What happened to Ellie's brother?" "I took him to a safe place." Ellie was as stiff as a statue, almost like if she moved, she would break the spell. "My brother's alive?" "Yes." Gabe stood and offered Ellie a hand to help her up. "I can take you to him, and you'll be with other Unguarded in a safe place. We can protect the dagger and make sure Caden never finds you again." Ellie looked at Gabe's hand and then looked at Treadon. He sat next to her. Her eyes were wide open, her lips parted slightly, a war on her face between what she wanted and what was right. Treadon reached out to touch the scars on her forearms. The partial bond she'd created with him had changed him, had created this pressing desire to protect her, to be near her, but Gabe had said that guardians needed to be trained, prepared. Ellie was one of the most wanted descendants on planet Earth. They wanted the dagger that could kill descendants, and Treadon had almost watched them take it. He'd only been able to stop them with the help of Jaren, Rachel, and his mom. Maybe he wasn't the right person to be her guardian. She needed to be safe. "You should go. To be safe," Treadon said, the words feeling like he was ripping a piece of duct tape off his heart. Ellie swallowed, her fingers tightening into fists. "I could see my brother. I should do what I didn't do 10 years ago." Treadon nodded, opening his hand to reveal the compass. Ellie put her hand over the compass. Holding her hand against his, their skin touching the cool metal of the amulet. She pulled away, taking the amulet into her fingers. "What about you?" Ellie asked. "What will you do?" Abigail shifted, her mouth opening and one hand coming out toward him. Treadon could sense Gabe's tension as well. They doubted he was the right person to be Ellie's guardian. "I don't know if I can be the guardian you need. I'm not even sure I'm the guardian you would choose, but I would choose you. I would be your guardian." Ellie's head dropped. "Not a full guardian. And I have no idea what that means for you. You could be following me into danger that you don't have the full abilities to face. I would be asking you to risk your life for a girl you hardly know, to give up everything, like your mom." Her last words caught in Treadon's soul. His mom's misery, her sorrow, his own desire to break her free of the life she was living. And here he was, offering to do the same thing. He paused too long. "But I'm not ready to do that to you." Ellie reached out and took Gabe's hand, standing and leaving Treadon feeling like he'd been hit by a blast of frigid air. "I'm ready to go. I'm ready to stop running." "We'll leave first thing in the morning," Gabe said. "You'd better get some sleep." Abigail let out a long sigh. "One thing you'll learn about this life is that you have to keep on doing everyday things, even while it feels like the world is falling apart. You've got 5 hours before school." "School?" Treadon asked.